Good morning, everyone.
صباح الخير جميعا. أنا متحمسا لأكون
Naufal, and I work for CNN Business Arabic. So this session, the AI race, the future of warfare. So today, as we stand at the edge of a technological revolution, we know that AI is no longer science fiction. And we have seen AI being developed in so many different industries, and more recently in warfare and defense. But with this power comes a Pandora's box filled with ethical, security, and strategic dilemmas. I have with me today leading minds and experts who will unpack the promise and the peril of AI-driven warfare. So I'd like to first of all welcome you all. We have with us His Excellency Major General Dr. Mubarak Saeed Ghafan and Jabri, who's the Assistant Undersecretary for Support and Defense Industries at the Ministry of Defense in the UAE. His Excellency James Morse, President of the Rabdan Academy. Julia Vu, Senior Fellow for Cyber Power and Future Conflict at the IISS in Singapore, and Dr. Jean-Marc Rickli, Head of Global and Emerging Risks at the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Switzerland. I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of your names, but welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us today at this panel. Major General, I'd like to start with you and ask you, how is AI being integrated into military systems, and what are the most recent advances when we speak about AI warfare?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
في البداية أريد أن أشكركم على الاستضافة. أعتقد بأن الذكاء الصناعي الآن يعلم باستخدامات
And it's a game changer everywhere. And defense is not away from that. The defense, they are utilizing AI in different aspects because it's bringing a lot of good things to the military and solving a lot of problems concerning the military organization, which really very complex. So if we can categorize that, we can say that there is three key applications for the military to utilize AI. First of all is the sustainment and support of the military organization in the troops. First of all, it's how you utilize that application in operation in the field, and how you integrate it to the system that you have as a legacy, and also how you support the other support organization concerned with operations, about transportation, logistics, and the support that you will give it through intelligence and information. The second one is the non-lethal applications. Here we are really talking about the surveillance and the intelligence. No doubt that the AI is close to creating a new era of data, very big, large data. And the military, in particular, they have a very huge data. They are allowed themselves to, acquire, satellites, intelligence systems, internet, open sources, and all these generated huge data, huge information. And in the ordinary way, to utilize that data, you need to have a lot of people to do the analysis. Today, it's not like that. The AI application, they can do it in one click and give the decision maker in that field the output more certain that they need when they need it. So this is a very critical issue, that the intelligence and surveillance and the reconnaissance AI is changing that domain and make it more applicable, easy to utilize. The second one is the command and control. No doubt, military is all about command and control, and that you have a very huge hierarchy, and you need to ensure that your command and control system is active and robust to ensure that you are getting the right decision and the right time and in the right hands. So AI is really having a big influence in command and control all over the world. The industry and R&D centers really adopting a new AI application integrate the command and control in the military. Another aspect is the cyber defense. Cyber attacks everywhere, and to control and to protect your facilities and your network in the military, you need to have an AI application to ensure that you are aware about all these attacks and how you live in the ordinary way, the legacy system that a human will deal with such. And there's a lot of applause there. But with AI application, you are reducing that and you are increasing efficiency. And no doubt the third one is well known, which is the lethal autonomous systems. We are talking about loitering ammunition, unmanned vehicles, robotics, precision guided missiles. All these systems today with AI applications is more accurate. So collateral damage, and if you are going with AI as a control, when you certain targets and hit the target that need. This in the domain of the armed forces and the ground troops, AI applications really change the whole.
Thank you, Major General. But before I move on to my next question, I'd like to remind the audience that they can ask a question through.
نريد أن نذكر الجمهور بأنه يمكنهم أن يطرحوا الأسئلة من خلال مسح الكود الموجود على
With the headphones, one is for Arabic and two is for English in case you want to change the language. James, how do you train the military personnel to use this AI in military applications or in warfare? How do you train them?
Well, thank you very much, and again, I echo thank you very much to the Hili Forum for inviting me to join. I congratulate them on what they've achieved, and thank you to the General for his opening comments covering so much of what we have to address in the military side, on top of which I might just throw in influence operations, because I think what we're seeing, if you see warfare as a competition of will, then you mustn't forget that AI is having a profound impact in the way we communicate messaging. So we're well aware of bots and things in social media, but we're beginning to see fake news, fake videos, things which are going to impact the will of both the population to fight, but the will of soldiers to fight as well. So there's a huge range, and playing very nicely into your question about how do you train. So the problem we've got was we're covering a very large range of different activities, as summarized by the General. Level training for them is, of course, a challenge, as well as the fact that AI is going to change the way we train people. You can see synthetic environments have been used for quite a few years now, but increasingly we're going to see AI involved in training scenarios too. I think there are different aspects. If you look at the, starting with the lethal autonomous weapons systems, you can see the rapid development. It's almost, people are training themselves. If you look at Ukraine war, for example, they're training themselves in the front line, and we're seeing the transformation in contact with the enemy. So from both sides, we're seeing it going on. And I think at times, some of the militaries not involved in that are actually struggling to keep up with the training because it's changing so quickly that we're seeing a training challenge there. But I think within that, a drone is a relatively discrete thing. You can sit people down, you can train them on the operations of drones, you can train them on what the AI means for the drone operations, particularly in jammed environments, so that it can be autonomous. I think where it gets more challenging is in this field of command and control, the intelligence side, where AI systems offer the opportunity to synthesize large quantities of data to come up with analysis and very quick results. I think the difficulty here on the training side is that we don't necessarily understand how the system is operating, which has huge ethical and legal challenges, which I'm sure we'll come on to later in this panel. But if you can't actually understand necessarily the mechanism by which the AI is coming up with its advice and recommendations, then there is a challenge there on how you train people. Because the verification of systems, the way militaries use systems, traditionally is that you would get a missile system, you'd train on it, you'd see how it operates, you'd understand its capabilities and limitations, and then you could train procedures. The problem when you've got something like AI is, to an extent, you've got a bit of a black box, and therefore trying to actually train people to understand what it is doing to that information, that recommendation is a challenge. But inevitably, as we get more experience with this, as it's been targeting and other things, we are beginning to understand what is good. But of course, a lot of it is also related to training people around legal constraints. Because there's questions of who is responsible and accountable for the advice and the decisions from information systems, targeting systems, intelligence systems. So I think there's a real spectrum of answers to your question, because it does depend on the circumstance in which AI is being used as to how you're going to train people on using it. I think at the simpler end, the sustainment, the logistics support, I think because that will have a much bigger read across from industry, we will find that that is relatively straightforward. I think it's in that decision support intelligence side that it's going to be a real challenge to understand what advice is this AI providing me, how much can I rely on it, can it be deceived, and all of those sorts of things, which military commanders will always want to challenge when they get advice. But, even traditionally, that was always, how much do I believe? The 70% picture, the fog of war, all those great sayings. And I think trying to understand how AI is clarifying it rather than just believing it, but understanding it is a very big challenge for us.
Thank you, Julia. I wanted to ask you where
معه. أريد أن أسأل ما هو الذكاء الصناعي الإيجابي في الحرب؟
Hello? Okay. Try to... Okay. Which is, I think, obviously we're all thinking about this in a geopolitical context. And I think while we're starting the conversation on AI with its military applications, I think we should think about how actually, in comparison to some of the technology races that we've seen in the industry, AI and the development primarily outside of government control and in the commercial sector. And in fact, in AI, only a very small percent is on purely defense applications. And so I guess when we're thinking of geopolitical competition here, I think it's challenging actually for militaries and defense establishments because firstly, the innovation is happening outside, largely led by technology companies. And obviously it's dual purpose. Then the challenge is to bring it inside and adapt to warfighting purposes. And so there are kind of like, in a way, like two races, right? There's the race outside, public-private partnership, governments and militaries working with the private sector, and the race to bring it inside and be able to implement it. So I guess the first point on that is good luck to anyone on procurement processes, because that's going to be a significant challenge. Another kind of a point about this, which is if we look at other kind of around technology, there are a lot of parallels with here, which have been but there is one which is, I guess, the control of kind of key components, and obviously we can see examples of this with US-China chips. Chips are critical to but it's less of an enhance your advantage when talking about artificial intelligence chips. فبالتالي عندما نتحدث عن ذكاء صناعي أيضا past few years outside of the military التي يتم خارج المنطقة البنية الهيكلية so we're looking at data centers, cables, whether they're terrestrial or submarine, and increasingly like resilience and low
البنية الهيكلية إلى هذه يجب أن يتم الموافقة عليها ويجب أن
I think it's interesting to see that kind of competition all the various components
بين الكثير من
outside
الذكاء الصناعي خارج السيطرة
kind of being competition between various actors.
وهي منافسة بين عدة لاعبين على الساحة.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean. So I want to ask you the same question. Where do you see AI playing a positive role in warfare and defense? So now we're sticking to the positive side before we go on to the ethical and security dilemma.
Right. So my job is to look at the risk, So actually, I'm looking at the dark side of the force, if you want. But in terms of the positive, so definitely have advantages in terms of data analytics. General was saying AI's primary function is to go through data and make sense of data. So that improves not only the quality and the speed, but that has also impact on command and control. When you start to apply that kind of model to nuclear command and control system, then start to have scenarios that could be quite frightening. That in the military, it's all about trying to get in the decision-making of your adversary, what we call the loop: observation, orientation, action. And so what AI enables is getting into the decision-making cycle of your adversary in a way faster way that human do. There were examples done with, for instance, fighter pilot that put in simulation with algorithm, and they were defeated because the algorithm was able to actually get in. Then in terms of training, right, you can improve massively the way you train, especially if you start combining AI with immersive, augmented virtual reality. But obviously, this has also negative consequences. So some are arguing that you get more clarity, transparency on the battlefield. In a way, Ukraine is showing. If you're an infantryman in Ukraine, you have some issues. So these are, if you want, advantages that is provided by this system. The issue is really is to see, because this technology can use is dual use, all right. And the issue is how you can actually create system that will prevent misuse of this technology. And I can tell you, we have absolutely no idea, right? Really, the governmental group of experts in lethal autonomous weapons in Geneva, UN body that has been meeting since 2015 to decide or discuss whether the international community should ban those lethal autonomous weapon system or killer robots. Can tell you, after 9 years, we're not yet there. Last week I was in Korea at the RIEM Summit, responsible use of AI in the military. There was a blueprint that was accepted, but China opted out. So there's absolutely that kill this competition. The real issue that as AI is a general purpose technology that creates that basically can be used in any field, it come up with a governance system to which any members or states, especially the word power and so forth.
Thank you so much, Major General. So Google CEO said that AI is a black box and it's what keeps him up at night. So obviously there are some fears from artificial intelligence in all fields. When it comes to warfare and defense, something happens on the battlefield. Who is held accountable if there is an error, a mistake? The AI starts on its own to hallucinate and kill a civilian rather than the opposing side. Who is held accountable and what happens in these situations?
I think from the military perspective, you need to look at before and after. Let me a little bit elaborate in the why we are so revolutionary in technology today, and we end up with this situation. 40 years, 50 years ago, most of this technology was in the military, but it's changing. So the military depends on the civilian sector with R&D sector. So there's a lot of money there. And the military fund that technology out of the military border. This brings everyone to that, what we have today as a result of the huge revolution, a very rapid scale in technology and cutting-edge technology. And today, with AI applications where we are today, if we will see it from the benefits that I can simulate the coming 100 years of the battle space, where we are. And here, when you are connected AI applications with cloud computing, big data, and with supercomputing, I can different, input, and I can simulate what will happen. This will allow you also to reduce the collateral damage, and you can enhance your efficiency and enhance your decision making. And maybe you will abuse there's no war, because as this said here, you can build up a shield that you will, as Sun Tzu said, you will not enter the war, and you can cut it down and prevent it from happening, because you can use AI application to predict what will happen, and you will tolerate and kill that momentum in an early stage. This is now ongoing. Going back to your question, with AI application, you will be more accurate. So your target will be specific, and you will hit what it should be hit. You will not go to have a huge, damage in infrastructure, damaging assets. And here we need to emphasize on something which is today is in the mind of everyone, politicians and security agencies, which is, are we going to have full autonomy systems, or it will be remote? So mostly the full autonomy will come with that risk, which is you cannot control it. You will give it a mission, and you will do a mission as it learned, it has been deep learned to do it. And there is the risk. But with the remote control systems, AI, this will not happen. Again, in the field, when you use AI applications as a military, we used to have rules of engagement. Today we are creating rules of engagement to control, to govern the AI application in the field. So, as James said, when we are training our soldiers and troops, we put in our structure and mind, train them in rules of engagement, not the old legacy one, but the new one, which is adapting the high-tech field. So changing the doctrine, changing the way of training, and the way of educate your military personnel is changed, not like to adapt the future warfare.
I think for James, I'd like to bounce the question to you and ask.
أريد أن أعيد نفس السؤال عليك أيضا، وكما سمعنا
Are we scared potentially on the battlefield to see the same thing?
Thank you. I think it's very interesting on this, because humans kill innocent people and destroy civilian infrastructure. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that we're not very good at this traditionally, historically. So there is an interesting corollary to this question, which is, what if AI is better at it than humans? Are we going to make it mandatory to use AI? If it is better at avoiding collateral damage, reduces the number of civilians killed, will we, in the same way you could argue that self-driving cars might have to be brought in by law if they're safer than human-driven cars? Will we find ourselves in a strange situation where, ironically, actually flip this argument over, despite the fact that they systems, I think in warfare, we will always have some casualties. I think that interesting question about who is responsible and how well do we understand the system, that's probably where I worry. And there are some incredible data sets out there, particularly for civilian applications for AI. When you look at decision support for military commanders, most of the data sets are highly classified and quite limited in terms of volume in comparison to what's available in the wider commercial market. So I think there is a very interesting question of how good the AI can be based on those data sets. Therefore, your risk of hallucinations or similar must increase significantly. There is enough normally confusion in war, this term, the fog of war, that you can have hallucinations even without AI. Effectively, people start to believe things, partly because human brain works that way. When we have our heuristics that drive us to see patterns. And therefore, we already have that problem of effective hallucinations. And of course, in the military terms, one of the great arts of deception is playing into the enemy commander's preconceived ideas of what you might do. And therefore, there's a very interesting challenge here for AI. Can AI be deceived? Almost certainly, yes, in my opinion. Depends what picture you manage to feed, how you manage to show things, how well you understand the algorithm of your opponent may well drive how you can act in warfare. And in terms of responsibility, I mean, again, this is a similar question we're facing across all AI informs, if I go back to self-driving cars. But that question of, is it the operator? Is it the person who wrote the software? Is it the military commander? Is it the political leader who insisted, that this was the route you were going to go down? There's always a good argument. I think if you look at what the International Red Cross is looking at in terms of international humanitarian law, one of the things they're emphasizing is the importance of having a human-centric type system to try and make sure that we always hold that human responsible. You can't just say, well, I don't know why it did that. It's not my fault. It's happened in that black box. And there's a huge danger if we're allowed to go down that route. But I think, picking up on the General's point, there is, of course, huge opportunity if you look at lethal autonomous weapon systems of programming in rules of engagement, actually programming in some of these international law effectively into the way it can operate to try and provide constraints on it. But we better be careful about unintended consequences because, if the computer system, the AI thinks, I can answer the mission I've been given by killing my operator, or by doing something quite rogue, which is logical if you look at it from an AI application system, and is completely unforeseen by the people who wrote the software or fed it the data in the first place. So it's not just hallucinations. I think it's that we might not even understand how this is coming up with its conclusions, and when we let it loose, what is it actually going to do? Because with current weapon systems, you have a lot of predictability how they're going to work. I think with AI, we begin as military commanders will lose the predictability of what their systems are going to do. And therefore, there will be a very difficult challenge when they're standing up in hindsight, trying to explain the decisions they made. Today we have commanders writing down how they made a decision, so that if afterwards you go to the International Criminal Court or something like that, you can explain why you made this decision. With the information you were given, I made this decision. Of course, with AI, that's going to be a real challenge. With the information I was given, I listened to what the black box said and I did what it said. It's hardly going to stand up in an international criminal court, I think. And therefore, this is a massive challenge, not just hallucination, but far right.
دكتور جون، هل هذه المخاطر الأكثر تخوفا لديك؟
So, as I said, AI is an enabling technology. So, in the field of latent autonomous weapon system, in the end, if we reach a point where we are able to delegate a machine, which we're not yet, there is an ethical question here, and to, you prefer to be killed by a machine or by a human. And it's like, you think that human beings are good in nature or that. At the end, it's not cannot prove it. What keeps me awake at night is really two things. One is the pace at which the technology robotizes and predicts. And what you have to understand is that so far, what we're witnessing in this field are exponential growth. And so, what I told you, I've been in the group of UN discussion whether we should ban this weapon or not. 9 years. We meet twice a year in Geneva. And each time we look at what is AI. Start by this. In the meantime, we went from drones that were operated, to drones that are increasingly autonomous on the battlefield. So this exponential growth is completely disruptive. I was listening to Saeed the other day in a podcast. He was mentioning that if you take ChatGPT 3, the first version, it had to compute 1 year of compute on an individual. And so each version so far improves by 2 orders. Meaning that ChatGPT 4 was 100 years of compute, which is a human lifestyle. Now, when we reach if we reach ChatGPT 9, we follow that rule. Morse, that will be 10 billion lives. It will be equivalent of all the people on Earth. Then, if we manage to reach 9.5, it will be 10 billion.
That's extremely scary.
Which is all the human beings have lived on the planet since humanity. So the exponential combined with other tools like synthetic biology, like neurotechnology. What happens?
تكنولوجيا في الأعصاب وبرامج اللغوية العصبية. الآن يتم تطوير برامج وهنالك دراسة قام بها أحد الأطباء في أحد الجامعات الغربية بأنه سأل الذكاء الصناعي بالحصول على باثوجين جديد بيولوجي، وقام الذكاء الصناعي فعليا بتوقع باثوجين جديد. فبالتالي قدرة الذكاء الصناعي على التوقع
more and more is processed and هذه you could think where suddenly algorithm to develop new pathogen, and this algorithm will then find a way to actually synthesize automatically. And so if you just take an example in nature, you have to look at characteristics for pathogens. They can be viral or lethal. Nature pathogens so that the viral pathogens because it kills the host before that. But it has been proven now that with AI you can actually develop pathogens that are lethal and right. So about that. That's my first reason. Second worry is democratization, as you were mentioning earlier. This technology, once it is developed, it's almost impossible to stop the proliferation. How do you stop the proliferation of code? That's anything. And my worry is really some technology getting in the hands of from that. And we have example in the past, IISS, or our Shirokio, with groups like this that basically are not ready to compromise. If they get access to this technology, they probably
هي التكنولوجيا
especially how this technology develops.
Thank you. Also, I'd like to remind you once again that you could submit your questions. Julia, how should international bodies address or approach these types of risks? What should they do about it?
كيف للمجتمع الدولي أن يتعامل مع
So I guess so I tend to think about national power and cyber. So that's kind of the perspective.
الأمن السيبراني والقوى المحلية.
And I think that when we think about AI within conflict, outside of conflict, it's been mentioned by the Geneva and also, James, Dr. Rickli. I think the aspects that I'm most interested in outside of conflict are the obviously non-kinetic aspects, so the cyber and information operations, and critically like a combination of that, which is like the and I think that this is actually something that's very challenging for the international community, and also actually it starts at the national level. And so what I think personally what I mean by these operations in cyberspace are not just like the hacking for more than just intelligence collection and espionage, but also to disrupt, degrade, deny. So one example here is if you think about the Stuxnet operation against an atomic nuclear facility. Obviously, one of the clear outputs of that was degrading the nuclear centrifuges. But then there is commoners, which is nuclear scientists not just their judgment, maybe like not losing trust in the systems. there are these kind of intents with cyber operations in lots of different contexts, whether it's the hacking of the kind of critical infrastructure, train systems, banks, only does it disrupt services for kinds of access, but over time, I guess, reduce trust in services, so your government
الثقة أو انعدام الثقة بالذكاء الصناعي والأنظمة التي تتحكم بهذه المراكز الحيوية.
I think earlier were mentioned, and obviously there's a lot of focus on that.
ذكر مجموعة من الأمثلة في عمليات استخدام فيها الذكاء الصناعي. مثلا نحن الآن في عام الانتخابات الأمريكية.
Covert operations to shape narratives for national interests. And I think
ونجد أن هنالك الكثير من الشركات التي تستخدم الذكاء الصناعي وجمع بيانات شخصية
I guess a peak in activity for disinformation operations.
أو يتم استخدامها ضد هذا يعتمد على الطريقة التي يتم استخدام هذه
I think the challenge here is really about kind of building societal institutions, just on the kind of international community level.
والمثابرة والقدرة على
مواجهة responsible behavior
هذه السلوكيات من قبل المجتمع المحلي والمجتمع.
But the national level, obviously, the government's work, private sector, obviously, social media platforms, developing kind of AI technology
على تطوير حلول ذكاء صناعي
cyber attacks to kind of defend systems. But I think what the real challenge is that the information is incredibly with a lot of junk that's actually always from the malicious.
التي يتم جمعها في هذا العالم هي معلومات.
I think as individuals in society we struggle to process.
غير دقيقة. هناك الكثير من الإشاعات والمعلومات المغلوطة التي يتم نشرها. لذلك نحن كبشر يمكننا تشغيل التحليل المنطقي في محاولة
thinking about defending your kind of society's
التمييز بين المعلومات المغلوطة والنصوص الصحيحة واتخاذ القرارات. لكن هل الذكاء الصناعي قادر على
critical thinking
القيام بهذه المسؤولية أيضا محاولة مواجهة صناعة المعلومات كنوع من أدوات الحل والدفاع. هنالك الكثير من هذه العمليات التي يحتاج المجتمع الدولي إلى جلسة نقاش
to counter
ما هي الأمور التي يمكن أن يتم استخدام الذكاء الصناعي فيها وطريقة عمل الذكاء الصناعي. أيضا
earlier in the plenary section we were talking about these two poles. And I feel like at one end of both ends of these poles, it's quite different types of information ecosystems. And I think that this type of application of artificial intelligence really changes the balance of power and is a real vulnerability for those countries that have much more open information ecosystems that are much more vulnerable to this information advantage from adversaries.
Thank you, Major General. When we talk about an AI armed race, how will this change the balance of power and deterrence?
كيف هذا يغير من
Well, the risk of an armed race is real. Because when you will see the security and defense organization, they have a certain task to protect the country. So to protect your country, you need to be part of that dynamic. And you need to bring the best to your military to ensure that you are doing the right thing and you will get the objective that you have been hired for. So we need to be aware about that this race is going more difficult. It's the beginning. The technology is evolving and the technology is going rapidly in a different way. So the risk of having that, for me, it's late. It's already there. And we need to adapt how we will control, how governance and such technologies. And I can see there's a lot of initiatives all around the world that the European, they already start establishing new laws for that. Last week we were in Seoul. I was participating in a summit, which is the the responsible use of AI in the military. And there's more than 60 countries that have been signing for the declaration of we can use that in a responsible way. And there is a momentum to engage with different countries to also join that, because we are sensing that there is a huge risk in the security of the world. And the way that it's happening today, maybe it's not like clear for everyone. The problem is when we will have non-state actors, when that technology will be then there will be a big problem that you will control organizations. This kind of technology will change, is a game changer in the field of doing business. Now, military legacy, as James mentioned, is controlled by humans. So the human is doing 80-90% the weapon system. Today, with the AI application, we are substituting that humans by autonomous robotics weapon system. We minimize the role of the human and the weapon systems you make. So this is a good thing. So, and ensure that we are doing it in the right way. We need to talk, we need to communicate, we need to have, just like your form today, exchange ideas, and ensure that we have a good way and agreed on a lot of, governance ideas, not only in national level, within the countries by themselves. They should some responsibility of that. We are in the military, especially, we have that kind of regulation and governance for such technologies, and we are adapting ourselves to the best, security export. So I think this is the way how to deal with it.
Thank you, Dr. Jean. I wanted to ask, do you see new superpowers emerging with AI in warfare?
So if you look at who's producing this technology, you have basic exam to it's the United States and China. But these technologies are very rapid. So you have countries like Turkey, basically makes a name in drone technology. Israel has developed developed systems. I don't know other type of the issue really is to develop this system. You need a lot of money. Look at how much of an AI is trying to raise in terms of funding, to compete. And so it is almost impossible now for a startup company to compete with these giants. So there is a first mover, but at least second mover advantage. And you have and then a monopoly. But then again, once this technology is being developed, quite rapidly, and then basically trying to do that. It's trying to pick some off-the-shelf technology and recombine it in order to use it as a force multiplier. So, in a way, it could be also seen as an equalizer. The issue will be not just the countries that are able to innovate, but how fast and how widely the technology diffused. And that's very important, because at the end of the day, you only have 1 or 2% of your industry that are at the top and have adopted technology. The rest of your technology not diffused. So diffusion is very important. And for diffusion to happen, it looks like we have an example during the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the economy could not keep up with computers and so, and in a way, it collapsed. So for that, you need an ecosystem that allows, the diffusion of this technology, and for that, you need to support innovation, and you need to furnish it. So in a way, it's the liberal system that's in this field.
Agree with that, Dr. Jean. And what does this mean for
هل تتفق مع
I think that's a very good what does it mean for non-state actors? I think it's a huge opportunity for industry. This is a question around like competition and like great powers, right? Okay, cool. So I think it's a huge opportunity for industry to actually it's just a massive commercial opportunity for them, but I think that in terms of other like non-state actors, do you mean like adversaries or like criminal groups? Okay. I think as you can see through like cyber capabilities and cyber operations, and also obviously with the application of AI in information operations and disinformation, that if the capabilities are out there, a lot of them are open sourced, you can buy a lot of data on the black market, then a non-state actor, be it a criminal group or a non-armed group, would get the kind of capabilities they need and apply them. And I think it's really tricky when we're talking about dual-use technologies, because it's much easier to get access to the capability and kind of refine it for your own needs. I think that there is, when we're thinking about how does like civil society play into this, when we're thinking about defending against information operations and making your societies more resilient, I think it's tricky there because, in a number of countries, they have like fantastic volunteer efforts, particularly around elections in Southeast Asia or the Nordic countries. But it seems to be like on a volunteer basis. And I don't really think it's particularly sustainable in terms of like folks doing this on top of their full-time jobs and also journalists. So I feel like governments as like a central coordination force would need to work much more closely and support kind of industry and also civil society in order to build like a whole of society resilience to these kind of cyber threats.
James, when we talk about using AI in warfare, would this potentially mean shorter wars? We said less collateral damage, more peace, or are you not very optimistic about that?
Wars never tend to be as short as you wish them to be. In my experience of looking back over the past hundreds of years. So I think the idea that somehow AI is going to make them quicker is perhaps overly optimistic. War is inherently competitive. That is what war is about. The enemy gets a vote. They don't do what you want them to do. And therefore, really the challenge is how quickly you adapt to the circumstances in which you find yourself and use the equipment, the technologies, your people, to fight the war you find yourself in. And we've got some great examples where people have failed to do that in the last few years. But if you look at that, and let's go back to the lethal autonomous weapon systems, look at Ukraine. So why is this evolution of drones and the use of AI being brought forward there? There's not a superpower doing this. But what's happened, of course, let's say the Ukrainians launch a drone, the Russians jam it. So what's the answer to that? It's got to operate in a jammed environment where you've lost connectivity with it. Therefore, you've got to develop some sort of AI so that it can target when it's got no communication. So what do? You look off the shelf, you take commercial solutions, you experiment. And that's, I think, what's happening. You've got a lot of very dynamic young people experimenting with technologies in the war zone. And of course, I think we should recognize that war zones are not very ethically challenging. When your friends have been killed around you, when people are trying to kill you, you do have a slightly different perception of ethical boundaries to what you might do. So what we've got going on, I suspect, is experimentation with little control within the overall ethical boundaries of what we in sensible state-like situations might think is acceptable. And I see that as a problem because to an extent, yes, we'll have superpowers in the technology, but it'll be adapted and used by other people very quickly, and we'll see that spin-off. If you then go into the non-state actors, though, you look at the regulation that's been taken place over the years in nuclear, in chemical, in biological, And states on the whole follow the rules because states can be held accountable. Non-state actors are very hard to hold to account for fairly obvious reasons. And therefore you see terrorist organizations using chemical weapons. And there's very little comeback on it. Doesn't matter what the rules say because they're not going to follow the rules. So this technology proliferation and availability of AI effectively on the open market that can be adapted is a deep concern because we can come up, there's some great conferences going on trying to work out how states will control and perhaps legislate, and international organizations might legislate about AI. But then we've got a whole group of people who don't care what people think about there. We've got, even if you go back into terrorism, just radicalization by AI. If you look at what terrorist organizations will be doing to radicalize young people using AI, it'll be faster, it'll be more widespread. So we're going to have a more radicalized youth. We're going to have non-state actors, terrorist organizations quite prepared to use any of these technologies to further their aim. They've tried to get hold of nuclear weapons. We've looked at dirty bombs. So it doesn't matter what the nuclear regulations or the chemical weapons or the biological. We've seen terrorist organizations try and embrace these sorts of systems. Hence I think that concern from Dr. Jean-Marc about pathogens, because if you can do that in a university already quite easily, there's no reason why we won't see terrorist organizations trying to embrace the same technologies to design themselves new weapon systems to attack humans with. So, yes, I applaud the efforts, the political declarations in the US, the REAIM, that the General was talking about, all these initiatives to try and provide regulation around state use. But the genie's out of the box here, out of the bottle here. We've got a real problem that will proliferate very quickly, as we've seen with all the other technologies. When drones were first invented, we all thought, it'll only be the states who have them. Little do we know that within seconds it'll be narcotic smugglers, it'll be criminals using them, it'll be all sorts of other organizations using. Yeah, and this is a really big challenge to us because we might see it through the ethical and legal lens, but they won't.
I wanted just to add one more thing. What does this mean for guerrilla warfare, who use usually unconventional methods? Like if we're having a state, for example, using artificial intelligence towards armed groups that are using guerrilla warfare, would it be advantageous to use AI, or it would be difficult?
Well, I'm sure they will want to use AI. I mean, everyone is already effectively using AI in their system. So guerrilla organizations will, in the same way I talked about non-state actors, depending who the guerrilla organization is and how you wish to define them, but effectively as a non-state actor, we'll see insurgencies. We're seeing insurgencies use AI already. So I don't think there'll be a constraint. The idea that everyone will be using this. There'll be those people who find themselves constrained by legal and ethical things, and there'll be those who don't. And I think one of our biggest challenges is how we're going to deal with those who don't feel constrained. How are we going to protect our societies from people who have no ethical or moral constraints on their things? So we're not talking about states, so we're talking about everyone else.
Thank you. And now I'm going to start taking questions from the iPad. So some of the questions are general, not addressed to someone specific. So whoever can answer it, please go ahead. And some are more specific. So the first question is, so in the preliminary session today, the panelists discussed the importance of trust, transparency, collaboration between states when it comes to AI and technology. I was wondering if these are applicable to defense and warfare systems, and in particular, the data that has been mentioned frequently in the panel.
Good. The main thing that we say a lot of things about good things that we can do and the bad things, as any technology is bringing good and bad. But for the military, we have a governance and we have the accountability. It's always like that. You need to have a governance and you need to have some kind of accountability to ensure that your technology, your weapon system is in the right way. As I told you, we are changing what we have been doing in the way that we used to do to address the new era and how this AI application will be used and utilized in the war. You are not fighting yourself, you are fighting adversaries. So you have enemies, maybe state actors, maybe non-state actors, maybe terrorists, maybe countries, you don't know. So we are framing the whole thing in a way that we have kind of governance and accountability to ensure that we are utilizing the AI application within our armed forces in the right way with the rules and governance that we are produced and signed by the government.
Okay. Yes, if I could add to that as well, because I think if you look historically, again, you look at arms limitations treaties and you look at international agreements, to an extent have relied on transparency and on the exchange of information and on verification. Open skies agreements, the START agreements, everything about how do you check up? And of course, at the nuclear level, that's fairly obvious. I think if the whole point about this is deterrence is about communicating your capability and effectively your sort of red line to your opponent. We haven't actually talked here in the use of AI in support of nuclear deterrence. Now, you can imagine the sort of, if we're worried about it at other levels, can you imagine if the decision-making on the use of nuclear ballistic missiles was based on AI? How well do we understand? How much do you trust the country facing opposite you that their AI is going to come up with the right decision? And again, historically, we've narrowly avoided as a world several incidents in which there could have been a nuclear exchange between the superpowers. It was avoided by human intervention in the decision making. That was the old automated systems. So I think this openness and transparency is going to be very important, particularly I would say when you look at nuclear deterrence, because if we don't have it, the distrust of systems that can launch, you have to counter detect, and you've only got a few minutes to make that decision in. I think will be a real issue if we don't have any transparency. So I'm just throwing that in because it's slightly separate to where the general is talking about. But I think in nuclear deterrence and at the high end, we are going to need this transparency, or we're going to find ourselves destroying our world without even knowing it.
But the issue of trust is fundamental. That's probably the most important aspect in the discussion. So there is trust in terms of military system, as just mentioned. You have now this discussion on application of AI in nuclear system. A few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 2 American colonels wrote an article where they argued that the US needed the dead hand. So basically a system that would automatize nuclear launch. And this article was received, with huge criticism. Now what we start to see emerging is increasingly AI being used in command and control system, to the point that my organization has now started this year a diplomatic dialogue between the P5, the 5 nuclear power official, to actually discuss ways to put some boundaries, because even though it's not about the launching that we are talking about, it's about the entire command and control systems, the surveillance, and it is speeding up, if you want, your decision-making cycle. In a nuclear crisis, the last thing that you want is to be pressed by time to take a decision. If you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. The second aspect, and I think that's much more important, is the issue of trust in society. And Julia was mentioning disinformation. Well, now with this system, what we start to see emerging, we've seen deepfakes. Deepfakes were invented, the technology was invented in 2014. In less than 10 years, you can see military application on the battlefield, where you can basically mimic any individual. Earlier this year, you have Apple that released Apple Vision Pro, so the goggles that allows you to be in a virtual environment. Apple Vision Pro has eye trackers. Now, Apple has also patented earbuds with sensors, about 50 neurosensors, that will allow, it's already existing, to monitor your brain activity. When you start to enter a world where you can basically understand when a person looks at something and understand the brain activity of that person, you start to monitor its emotional state. So for younger generation that spend a lot of time on video games, moving from an ecosystem of video game to a metaverse will be completely natural. Now, what will happen if we continue down that path is that it will be increasingly easily to manipulate people, even though you think you have critical thinking, because all your defenses will be deactivated. Now, if you look at what happens in Europe and elsewhere with war in Ukraine, the power that information has to polarize society. And this is key, because each of us has a social contract with our government. The social contract being that we agree to refrain some of our freedom, but in return we get security from the state, and that is based on trust. If you want to undermine the country, you destroy trust that citizens have in society, and that is non-kinetic. And the means that we are developing, for instance, now with AI and with neurotechnology, we've reached a point now where you put patient in functional MRI and you can start to analyze what the people are thinking. It's still in the laboratory, but if you look at the pace of this information at which it evolves, we should really think about that and start to protect our society against adversarial use of that kind of methods, because they're completely undermining trust. And trust is the most important currency that we need.
Another question is about the risks of if a military system is using AI. So the risks of a cyber attack happening on these systems and what it means. Who can take this question?
Well, I mean, yes, there is a risk. I mean, a fairly obvious risk that if you can get into a military system and hack it, then you clearly can. And I mentioned earlier about deception, because it's not actually just hacking. If you understand how the algorithm works, you can begin to see things like visual recognition technology. So the ones that are going on drones, looking down, saying that's a tank, that's not a tank. If you understand how it's doing that analysis, you can put up anything. And if the algorithm will say, oh, that's a tank, because you fed it information that says it's a tank. It's not a tank, but you can deceive it as well. So we've got an issue of hacking and manipulating that. And we've got an issue of wider deception into these systems. And you know, if we say that they're based on the database on which they've been trained, again, I think biases inherent in a lot of databases are going to distort what we've done, and this has been a problem over years. I remember many years ago already, they were trying to train software to recognize tanks in woodlands. And they got to the point where it was nearly 100% accurate. But what they realized was that the pictures of the real tanks were taken on a sunny day, and the pictures of the things that weren't tank was on an overcast day. So the system had said, if it's sunny, it's a tank. And that was the conclusion it had come to. So again, do we understand? You can test it. It might appear to be 100% accurate, but do we actually understand what it's doing? Do we understand why it's coming up with that conclusion and advice view? So as I say, it's hacking is a problem, deception is a problem, and just frankly, how the system itself is making its decision. The large language models work on the basis of predicting what's a likely thing to come up in that sequence. So we have to be really careful to understand what it is what we're using this AI for, brilliant though it is.
But we could just mention cybercrime, right? It is estimated that next year cybercrime will cost $10.5 trillion to the world. Just to put into perspective, it is estimated that the global war on terrorism from 2001 to 2020 cost the American $5.4 trillion. So next year, just because of cybercrime, it will be double the amount of what the Americans paid for 20 years. And why is it so? It's because we are diffusing this technology, and increasingly anyone can actually start to engineer malwares. So think about that in terms of the impact that this technology already has.
The last question before we head to the main stage for the closing remarks. So we've probably all watched The Matrix. We know what happens in that movie. So the question is there a possibility that one day, because you said, Dr. Jean, that now ChatGPT-4 has a certain IQ, and in a few years it will have 100 times fold that IQ. Do you think it's a possibility that AI or robotics or robots will be able to take over our world today?
that you refer to debate called singularity. So a point where a machine would actually outsmart a human being. And there is absolutely no agreement within the scientific community about that. But what we start beyond just computing power, there was a very interesting experiment last year where a chatbot, medical patients were asked to rate the quality of medical advice received by chatbot and doctors. And chatbot ranked higher. But then they also asked the patient to rate empathy. And chatbot scored higher than a chatbot, than medical practitioners on empathy. Empathy is the ability to relate to human beings. Now, if we have machines that have increasing computing capacity, as well as the ability to relate to other human beings, even though they are not empathetic the way we are, but they mimic empathy, then we have to be careful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for my panelists as well for this lovely discussion. Thank you.